What's up, everybody? It is Andrew Clear here from the F1 podcast, bringing to you season 3, episode 24. I'm with the lovely Erica Hollingsworth today. Erica, how are you?
I'm doing well, Andrew. How are you?
Fantastic. This week, you got the dynamic duo of myself and Erica doing the podcast as Ricci is in the motherland.
Yes, he's enjoying a well-deserved vacation, traipsing about all over. We're very, very jealous, but hope he's having a lovely time. And guess what? He got to watch Monza in Italy.
At a British pub.
But that's besides the point.
That's,
Either way.
that's besides the point. But don't tell me that you couldn't find an Italian bar that was hosting the race in Monza to watch on TV.
Probably, apparently, a harder challenge than one would think. So, it is what it is. Granted, I did the same thing in France. Couldn't find a French pub. It was a British pub. So
Not gonna lie though, we went to Paris a few years ago, my friends and I, and we were just looking for something to do at one point, and we found this underground British pub that had EPL soccer on. I was like, this feels right.
yeah.
It just felt good. So I understand where Ricci's coming from, but come on, man, you're in Italy. Yeah, he also found a very nice Ferrari store,
Yes.
and he looked like he was in heaven there.
Very much so. Just living the dream.
So, as you can tell, we're here to talk about Monza, which happened this past weekend ago. And we're also going to provide you some news in F1 that happened. But first and foremost, let's talk about Monza, Erica. The fastest lap recap. You'll be doing it today. And
Yes.
Oscar Piastri set the fastest lap with a $1:25
My boy.
on the clock, beat Verstappen's time, I think, by 2 or 3 tenths. So that took away let's say, I guess, not a pity point from from Verstappen's side.
An inconsequential point from Verstappen.
He could have won the World Drivers' Championship in one race or sooner. Who knows? But nevertheless, Piastri has it. So I have the timer up. You let me know when you like to go, or you want me to count you down?
Count me down.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Here we go.
The Temple of Speed, Monza 2023, got off to an exciting start with Carlos Sainz on pole, fending off a hungry Verstappen, followed closely by Charles Leclerc as Max was chasing the record-breaking 10th consecutive win in F1. Proving that he deserves his seat with such an iconic team, the Spaniard Carlos held him off for 14 laps until going deep in the first chicane of lap 15, giving Max an edge to stay alongside and sweep into the lead later on turn 5. From there, Max was clear in the lead, but that left Checo to work on his way through the field, although the Minister of Defense could not be denied and held off forever, gliding easily into P2 after a few more laps. From there, most of the excitement in this race was in the midfield, with both Ferraris and McLaren engaging in some competitively spirited driving with their teammates, each narrowly avoiding a cataclysmic collision with the other. Also of note, during this race, we have to commend Alex Albon's fantastic display of talent in the Williams, landing him a P7 finish after starting P6, as Lewis Hamilton will not be denied even in the underperforming Mercedes. That said, Hammer's finish was not without some controversy as he collided with Piastri, causing the Aussie to lose out on a higher finish than his eventual P12. We also saw Russell's position gain over Ocon by exiting the track limits, cause him a 5-second penalty, with the same coming of Piastri for a collision with Liam Lawson. Will Max get a coveted 11th win in Singapore? Only time can tell. Let's see what we get up to in the rest of this episode.
Look at that. That was right in the money. That was probably the cleanest fastest lap recap we've done. Erica, congratulations. That was very well done.
What can I say? If you do a little bit of limericks and warm-ups and tongue twisters beforehand, anything is possible when you're presented with 1 minute and 25 seconds to recap a chaotic race.
Very fair. It was chaos. It was Max's 10th win in a row, setting a new F1 record, being the 71-year record set by Ascari, and then as well as tied by Sebastian Vettel. Ironically, one of them being in a Red Bull as well. Another Red Bull driver takes over as with most wins in a row, 10, as well as it was Red Bull's 15th win in a row. But Erica, let's travel back to Saturday.
Yes.
Big qualifying opportunities for everybody, as it was the alternative format, hards in Q1, mediums in Q2, softs in Q3, which really brought some fun fun qualifying in Q3 overall.
We saw a lot of interesting moves between Q1 to Q3. I had people who I would expect to go farther not make it even into Q2. I had folks who I'm used to seeing go out in Q1 make it to Q3. It was a really fun day and a lot of really interesting strategy going into qualifying as well for a lot of folks. So for me to see both Alpines out in Q1 was shocking, but I'm not totally surprised because I feel like this is a car where the hard tire is not necessarily something that works super well from them.
And like every Q1 in Monza, by the end of the session, it's an absolute shit show with the parking lot going on around the Parabolica. And
Yeah.
it's tough. If for to be honest with you, if you don't put in a very good bank lap to start, you are on the back foot to begin with in any qualifying session, just because of the traffic, right? You're going
Yeah.
to be caught in everybody's dirty air at some point, just based on how everyone just gets them bunched up. And yeah, both again, shocking that both Alpines were out. Not so shocking that Lance Stroll can't make it out of Q1 again.
Still
Uh,
shocking that he was 20th though, I will say.
yeah, it was a bit of a kick in the face, a little bit there as an Aston Martin fan, because having been able to see that uh Alonso was able to get to Q3 but finished P10. Clearly they did not have the setup right, because traditionally if they
Hmm.
do, you're seeing Alonso fight for say P5,
Yeah.
P3 to P7 in terms of that area with regards to qualifying. But yeah, P10 on the back foot. He even said after the weekend that they didn't get the setup right. And I find when they don't get the setup right, it's not as effective for Alonso, but Stroll just gets hampered down by it, and it's a real big loss for the team.
It is. It's very disheartening, but at the same time, you would still expect him, we got Alonso into Q3. You would expect that a teammate in a similar setup would at least get to Q2. So we're kind of like, what's going on over there right now? So it's a rough time.
My question I have to ask, and I don't like to judge people's character on this because I know that this is their full-time job, and they do put a lot of effort into work into the job. But I don't know. For me, over this past couple of years, I just don't see the same fire and passion in Lance
Hmm.
as he did when he was kind of first starting out in F1. I think maybe, I don't know if the fact that people are just calling him daddy's driver is really starting to, get into him mentally, and it's starting to really just affect how he enjoys the sport. Because I just don't see that same fire and passion as he does. It's funny when you're watching like the Grill to Grid videos, he's got such a great personality. He's laughing around, he's having a good time, but it's not translating that onto the track.
Yeah,
And you almost kind of wonders, does he really want to? Like, not that he doesn't want to be. I know he always puts a ton of effort in, but it's like, does he really like? Is he really feeling that passion about racing as much as he once did?
for sure. I mean, if you think about it, he did come in with a bit of promise, even though there's always been the jokes about daddy's money, because he had done well in the previous circuits. So maybe for him, you think about the longevity of careers in F1, and if you're not really delivering kind of after 5, 6 years in seat, I think for a lot of folks, you do kind of wonder if maybe your next move is something else, because as with any professional sport, you do have a limited amount of time in which you can really perform at that top level. So maybe it's a different racing series you want to go to. Maybe it's apparently in his case tennis that you want to set your sights on. But there were some other younger drivers who were outperforming him, so there's that on the mind as well, I'm sure.
Well, very fair. But that led, the Q1 and the medium in Q2 led to a kind of a really fun qualifying Q3 where, kind
Yeah.
of like Monaco again, we had at the end of the session, Leclerc set the fastest lap. And then Max sets the fastest lap after that. And then Sainz comes over the top rope
Yeah.
and sets the fastest lap in Monza in front of the Tifosi. And that place went nuts.
Nuts.
I know like Silverstone is an amazing atmosphere with the British fans, but you almost kind of have to say Monza's on that level, or even a little bit better when the Ferrari just performs so well, especially after the kind of the torment that the fans have been through this year. Just to see that their guys finish P1 and P3 out of the gate in qualifying must have been just so inspirational, right? For the Tifosi.
Yeah, just for the season and for that to be what's going on at this point in the season at that track. Because as much as you have Ferrari fans everywhere and you would have heard a roar in the crowd if you were at, say, like Singapore or something like where we're going to be in the next few weeks, it's Monza. This is like the Tifosi on steroids when they're in the crowd, right? Like this is the race for this team to come to. And what an amazing way and what a great crowd. Like you could see Charles after qualifying in the interview, like the guy was giggling. He like couldn't keep a straight face while he's going through the interview. It was amazing.
And it led to a great race on Sunday as a
Hmm.
result, with Sainz starting off on pole, being able to fend off Max for about 14 laps, as with the zero, pretty much zero downforce that they're running on the wings. You are, the DRS effect is not as important, or it doesn't have as much effect traditionally as it would at other tracks. And you can really tell because Max was, battling to stay with Sainz, and he would get ever so close, like up towards maybe 9 meters in front of him before the breaking point going to the first chicane. And Carlos kept, he was perfect for those first 14 laps, and he just made that one mistake heading into the chicane on lap 15, which cost him dearly.
It was very kind of difficult to watch that go down because I think so many of us, we just are craving someone to keep that excitement. Like, even if Carlos didn't win, which I think a lot of folks didn't expect him to, just with how competitive this Red Bull car is. They just wanted to see that kind of like hope stay alive and maybe go through the first half, 3/4 of the race, and have it kind of come down to the wire just for like some level of exciting competition. Like we said, it was unfortunate that it was a small error that resulted in it, but it was so exciting for those first few races. Max is lunging in, Carlos is just displaying a master class in defensive driving. Like, truly, I was watching the race with Spencer, who's on the podcast, and we were sitting here like screaming in the living room, like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" The entire time. So it was it was so exciting, and the same with qualifying as all those laps were coming in. Like, what a fun weekend compared to the weeks we've had in the past.
Almost makes you ask, like, what if Sainz didn't make that mistake? He
Yeah.
probably would have fended off Max into the pit stop, which, as Russell mentioned, that the undercut was going to be a very crucial part in this race to,
Yes.
overtake. Uh, with that said, who knows if Max would have been able to overtake on the undercut, but say he was not. I think if Sainz rode that race perfectly, he would have fended off Max for the entire 51 laps.
Yep.
We forgot to mention Yuki Tsunoda got caught. What a shit show to start the race.
I felt so bad for him. I mean, that was so unfortunate that during a formation, yeah, we didn't even talk about how chaotic the start of this race
Yeah.
was. Like, formation lap, Yuki Tsunoda's car just basically implodes in on itself and he can't start. And so we get like a reshuffling of the grid, and then everyone does another formation lap. Then there's the stop. No one's team in the garage knew if they were supposed to go out on the track, and then people are hopping over fences to get to the cars. It was just
And they
a
finally
hot
let them
mess.
go, and it was a nightmare. So as a result, with the abort start, they redid the start again, and just because for fuel purposes, right, you can't refuel.
Hmm.
They just took those laps away. So started with they, completed 51 laps overall as part of the race. But yeah, what ifs. I do say though that this I thought it was interesting though how two teammates, well, two teams had both teammates, as you mentioned earlier, competitive in their spirit against one another. That almost led to double DNFs potentially in the race.
I gotta say, so I will kick it off by talking about the racing that was going down between Leclerc and Sainz for quite a while there as they were duking it out for third place. But the amount of smoke coming off the brakes as people were kind of locking up going into the first chicane coming out of the main straight, I was at the edge of my seat and was at the point where I was just sucking in my breath, like just waiting for something to go poorly each time.
Mhm. And I understand the whole fact of like you wanting to get on the podium
Hmm.
at your home race. And that was clearly evident between Sainz and Leclerc there at the end when those two were fighting for P3, especially after when Checo took over both Ferraris to go into P2. But there was a little touch of the back, and I was like, oh man, because if how much of a nightmare it would be, it would just kind of symbolize Ferrari's season. And thankfully it didn't happen, because it would have been a point where they both collided, would have both, wrecked themselves out of the race if if they continued fighting that hard. And it would have been potentially a double DNF or double lost points finish at home when you're, P3 and P4. like there was I think they even got asked to get held off a little bit, like don't be as too competitive, but race. That was just real bang to bang real racing at that point.
I think the most hilarious part, I don't know if it was Xavi or who, one of the drivers asked if there was any risk in racing, and they were told no risk. And that's the second when someone locked up and there's smoke everywhere and the cars almost collide like half a second later. Just pure broadcasting comedy in that moment. I don't know how else to phrase it. It was quality entertainment for sure. But there was
Now,
also
yeah, say we had two teammates actually lock horns and rub tires against each other. Erica, what was going on in McLaren this weekend?
my McLaren boyos. I don't know what was going on over there. I think it was a few folks that were, I mean, because both of them were not really at risk at that point of being out of the points. Like, it's not like it was jockeying for P11 versus P10, if I recall correctly. But it was a lot of the same thing, kind of like what we saw with Ferrari. They were so close to each other, and I was worried we were either going to get a repeat of Verstappen and Ricardo at Baku, where one car goes under the other, or we were going to get someone completely sideswipe someone else, or a repeat of what we would have seen earlier this season between the two Alpines, where the cars were racing each other super aggressively, ended up kind of overdoing it, and both of them, I can't remember if it was pop tires or car issues or collision or what that did it, but like because they were racing so closely, both had to pull over to the track, one behind the other. And I don't know if it's just a team that's hungry to kind of get back to what we saw at Silverstone, because they have kind of lost a little bit of ground since those races just before the summer break. And so the drivers really want to kind of put the pedal to the metal and show what they're worth. But it was exciting. But when that's your team, you're dreading every single lunge someone takes at another driver.
Well, I always wonder if Lando was tired of being the second McLaren behind one. You know how we had 2021. He was asked to finish behind Ricardo to
Yeah.
get that 1-2 finish. He was kind of falling behind. He was behind Oscar the entire time. And he's on the radio. He goes, "Look, I'm faster, guys. Let me through." And he just said, "Screw it. I'm going to go through anyways." Locked up tires. I forget what turn or even I forget what chicane, but I think Piastri rolled over the car, like they rolled over wheels. And I'm like, man, that is so dangerous. And because I think that could have, I think that legit not pretty much, well, outside of a couple opportunities, kind of knocked Piastri back a bit. And then, he then finished out of the points. But that is a risk where so much more damage could have happened.
Yeah.
And we would be having a totally different conversation at this point if the worst case scenario did, where they both crashed out.
Yeah, because whenever I see the really close wheel to wheel racing here at Monza, especially after the collision we saw between Max and Lewis in 2021, that wheel over wheel, anytime your car is maybe not solidly placed on the ground as you're going into a chicane or something, like there is potential for things to go very wrong, to get launched and to cause major structural damage to your car. So very much glad that that didn't happen and both cars were able to finish the race. We did see Piastri try to push to stay in the points, but unfortunately that little collision with Lewis that resulted in a front wing replacement and a longer pit stop kind of did him in toward the end. But honestly, just we were really lucky that we didn't see any kind of collisions. I have to ask though, because we did have another retirement in the race with Ocon, but I feel like I didn't really get any context for what went down there. Do you have any insight into what happened with Ocon?
Think it was a mechanical issue with the steering.
Oh,
that kind of forced them out. During the race, they had, he was battling hard with Russell, who ended up cutting the chicane at turn 1 and ended up getting a 5-second penalty because he didn't give the spot back, which, was tough for Mercedes race in that regards. But just another DNF for Alpine. It sucks, especially for Ocon. Considering that Alpine's just a weird case scenario this year because they went through such a turmoil internally with replacing their CTO, replacing their CEO, getting rid of their team principal, and then they come back. have a podium in Zandvoort, and then completely screw the pooch in Monza this weekend.
It makes little to no sense to me, truly, what is going on over there. But Gasly didn't have a much better weekend than Ocon would have had, so it seems to be that it's just unfortunate timing for them, and they weren't able to kind of build momentum after Zandvoort the week before. So
Well,
it is
it
what it is.
could be worse, Erica, because if you are a fan of the American instructor Haas,
Oh,
you would not like the comments that Kevin Magnussen mentioned out in dubbing. Well, both of I think Nico and Kevin Magnussen, Frank's assessment of the Grand Prix for the Haas team was dubbed the worst ever race by them because they were apparently
wow.
off by quite a bit of margin, no pace out there. And yeah, it was like a very much back of the pack, finishing P17, P18 to the point where they're going to be introducing a B spec car in the next couple of Grand Prix that emulate kind of Red Bull's overall design.
Wow. That's insane to have to do that if your car is underperforming that much, especially at this stage of the season, which is also hilarious to me because the team name in the Constructors' Championship is Haas Ferrari. And to be emulating Red Bull is pretty hilarious if you're in that situation.
But also, what I'm shocked about too is how is Haas, doing this kind of development? Like traditionally, they've like literally no money to do anything, right? And now they're all of a sudden implementing a B spec car. Like the year that they had Mazepin and Schumacher, they just legit made one car and said, "That's it. We're gonna focus on the 2022 development with those big regulations." But there was nothing changed, right? I think there
No.
was a chassis change for Mazepin because felt like he couldn't drive the car that was out there. But I think it's the pull that Nico and Kevin have now that they're committed full term. Maybe now it's the okay, Haas, no time to put the investment into a better car. But man, it's they've consistently they perform semi well on Saturday, right?
Yeah.
And they just lose a ton of pace on Sunday. They can't follow cars in that regards. And that's kind of been the story of Haas over the past few years, has been able to kind of somewhat qualify on Saturday, and then the race on Sunday, they just dropped off massively.
Yeah, which has been so disappointing because, like you mentioned, Saturdays have been good. Hulkenberg's been so impressive in qualifying for driving this car is what it is. Because I felt similarly about Haas and Williams for a lot of this. Williams is turning it around. I think we have to give credit to James Voles being there. Like, clearly there was the right pieces of the puzzle at Williams. They just needed the right guy to come in and build the process and kind of put it all together. Because we're seeing good stuff from Sargent too, like an unfortunate not points finish for him this week, but very impressive in qualifying. And it's you just there's talent. Like Hulkenberg and Magnussen have been around for a while. They're both people who exited the sport and came back, which is so hard to do. And to know that they're probably giving really good feedback the same way we've heard about Albon giving really good feedback to Williams, but this team like can't capitalize or isn't willing to capitalize and invest in what they need to do is just nuts. So I'm kind of curious to see this B-spec car and see if maybe it's them taking that advice and building this out, and that's why it's more like the Red Bull, and hopefully there's some kind of positive change to come out of it. Because yeah, it's one thing when they finished like P17 and some of the MP18 in races earlier this season when it was competitive, there was a lot going on, there's cars all over the place, but they were significantly behind for this race for sure.
So I know we were talking about losers. I want to say I think we should talk about two big winners this weekend. One being a former Red Bull driver, one being a current Red Bull Academy driver or junior driver. Liam Lawson and Alex Albon put their cars in a position that was, quite frankly, very impressive.
Yes,
This
incredibly.
weekend. Albon with an amazing Q3 performance, finishing P6, and then being able to fend off pretty much Hamilton, Norris, like Bottas, even Alonso, to finish P7. I know that Hamilton was able to overtake him towards the end of the race, but he was just doing some incredible defensive driving in a Williams. No
I
doubt.
know. It's
Right? He's
nuts.
just putting that car in positions that, give the team inspiration to move forward because traditionally they shouldn't be there. Go figure, right? But he's so well connected with that car, and I think he really wants to win with Williams. That we'll talk about it a bit later in terms of the comments that James Val's made about Alex Albon's driving, but just being to be able to consistently put that car in positions that is not really evidently showed here at Monza and picked up a key 4 points for the constructors.
Yeah, it was so fun to watch him drive too, because it wasn't just like, oh, he's here, no one can catch him, and then suddenly there's an overtake. Like there was active work being done on his part to maintain that position. And man, he's so fun in qualifying because he's kind of forcing other people to work a little harder than I think they otherwise would in qualifying. Because he was near the top for a while. Like I was wondering if we were going to have like a P2 Williams start for a hot minute there. I was like, what is going on here? So I very much agree. Like he's so talented. There's good momentum coming. That is 2 races in a row where he's finished in the points. P8 last week at Zandvoort and P7 this time at Monza. I'm curious to see what other kind of momentum they can build on. He's P13 in the championship. Did you honestly think you'd see a Williams driver sitting at P13 in the championship when this season started?
No, and truthfully, I think it's great to watch. I think the sport needs Williams to come back and be another constructor that fights for the top.
Yeah.
Just could bring that nostalgia back. But then it's also the heritage of the Williams team, and doing in Fred's and Claire's legacy would be great to see. Another great driver we saw was with Liam Lawson this weekend, finishing P11, so close to the points.
I know.
And in his second race of F1, really showcasing that he should be here full time.
I will be honest, because I'm not necessarily someone who's super in tune with some of the more junior leagues and the driver academies and such. So he wasn't really a name I knew until he was announced as Ricardo's replacement. But my goodness, this is incredible driving from someone who's super young, super untested until recently, like in terms of an F1 car, things of that. Like it's not like he's been in a whole bunch of practice sessions or anything earlier in the season. And he's in an AlphaTauri. And seeing as the other Alpha couldn't even get to the start line, I would say this is a pretty great result for him either way, like outperforming his teammate significantly, even though this was nothing Yuki could have done in this situation to do otherwise. But he's putting the pressure on because he started a little bit, he qualified P12, which is already super exciting. And then to kind of keep that positioning with Yuki having been P11 like throughout the entirety of the race is like what else can you ask for from someone who's in their second F1 race in a subpar car? I don't think there's much else you could ask for.
It almost poses the question: does where does he go full time now, right? Because I think we should talk about in the news. There's some questions about seats. Silly season is going to ramp up soon, and but I want to say though, how I got accustomed to Liam Lawson was watching in MF2, F2 with regards to the Rebel Junior team. But during COVID, I believe it was 2020 or 2021, both him. So Albon had just lost his seat at Red Bull. He became the reserve driver, and Liam Lawson with him. They've raced in DTM as part of like the Red Bull AlphaTauri outfit. And that's when Liam, I think he finished P2 in DTM's the driver standings that year. But just a crazy way to see how both of them were at one point teammates. Albon kind of coming off the back foot, Lawson growing, and just to see them both be able to rise back, Albon back into F1 and Lawson rising into F1 is a pretty unique scenario in that case, and just goes to show again how dominant that Red Bull Junior driving program is.
It's nuts. Whatever they've got in the water over there, keep doing it because it's working for you.
We haven't talked about Mercedes. What are your overall thoughts on them?
I think it's
fire there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. Lewis keeps complaining about the performance of the car, but we're seeing very steady performance from Russell. I don't think this is the best car they've created, obviously. Like it's got nowhere near the kind of dominance, but they're doing something right because they're still very much ahead of where many other teams are. I'm hopeful that they kind of sort it out as we move into the next few years because it would be really fun to see Lewis be a little bit more competitive and at least give us the hope of an 8th championship win. But where they are right now, and even hearing him on the radio, it almost doesn't sound like his heart's into it the same way. So I feel like they've got to like turn it around a little bit internally to give the organization as a whole a little bit more excitement and a little bit more to cheer for, so that both the drivers are keen to keep doing that and to keep going. But he signed on again and he's staying. So hopefully we see some good stuff out of them for the next couple of years.
Yeah, because beginning of the weekend, both him and Russell announced contract extensions the next 2 years. So I agree to your point, Erica. They need to. I know they haven't committed for the next 2 years, but give them a reason to kind of fight back to where the Mercedes lore is. Right? We've had times of period dominance, right, where we've had Red Bull for 4 years from like 2010 to 2013, and then it was Mercedes for the rest, and now back to Red Bull. It would be fun if we started had Red Bull would win a constructors championship one year, then Mercedes, then maybe Ferrari, then Red Bull again, then maybe Red Bull again, then Mercedes. Like, it was just a mix. Ideal. I know it's become a technology race, but it would be nice to see a few constructors at the top fight for that particular kind of like they did in 2010 in that regards.
Yeah, we haven't had the days of those close calls coming down to the final race of the season to determine winners in decades at this point. And it would be, I think, exciting for everyone. It would be chaotic, but it would be exciting for everyone if we kind of went back to those days where 2021, it came down to 2 drivers, but we've had seasons where it comes down to like 4 or 5 drivers, and you really don't know how it's going to play out. So maybe one day everyone will be on more even footing with their technology, and this will happen.
Fair enough. Any final thoughts on the GP?
Overall, super entertaining. Was kind of glued to my TV the entire way through. And compared to other races this season, that hasn't happened. So even though we didn't really have like any crazy flags or anything being thrown out there, it was very exciting and I was glad to watch it.
And for me, like Zandvoort, I love the crowd, the energy of the Tifosi brought this weekend at Monza. To me, there's nothing more iconic than that podium celebration with the Tifosi on the main straight there with all their flags, all their flares. It was, just iconic pictures, right? It would be nice again to see one day we have, a Ferrari driver like in 2019 when Charles won, just for them to win it again and just see the Tifosi just roar proud for their P1 driver. But nevertheless, that was a review of the Monza GP. Erica, there's been some other exciting news in the race in the world of F1 this week.
Let's talk about the week that was.
Yeah, the week that was. In particular, the new kind of 2026 specs have been kind of announced, or they're working towards it. But what I gathered and what I kind of read in a little report is that they're looking to do a 50-kilogram weight reduction in the car overall, with them being it's going to be a kind of a shorter car and a more narrow car, going back old school in that case. And I think that is very important for racing of the future, especially when we go to tracks like Monaco, where racing is pretty much null and void. Saturday is the day you want to be there because wherever you qualify is probably where you're going to finish. So having that, weight reduction, it's going to present a significant amount of challenges for teams, I imagine, getting the cars down to that particular weight, especially with the new engines. But what are your thoughts on that for 2026?
Kind of like you mentioned, I was excited because where was it? I think it was sometime before the season started. I had seen a comparison of the size and shape of F1 cars over the years, because we were talking about what tracks we wanted to keep, which ones we would toss if it were up to us. And yeah, you kind of miss a lot of the excitement when the cars are so big, because on a narrower street circuit, there's less of an opportunity for cars to overtake. So I think, this series of updates for like the current kind of model we're looking at, it was to have more exciting wheel-to-wheel racing. And I actually think that by moving to this new size and weight, we might get even more of that, because it'll be the technology advancements of the last several years, but with the smaller, more compact bodies that allow some of the crazy racing we were used to in the past. However, what does that mean for some of the technology in these cars? Because that is a significant amount of weight reduction. And if you think about it, like, engines have developed so much. Part of what comes with a faster, higher performing engine is size and weight in order to actually do everything that it needs to do to process the fuel, to get the electricity and all of the systems and stuff going through it. How do you keep that kind of power that people have come to love with the speed if it has to be smaller and lighter?
well, especially when they're going towards a net zero in 2030, right? You're going to have to give more towards the hybrid, more towards EV, and that isn't small, as you
No.
mentioned, right? Their batteries are huge, and I think that's what Christian Horner has alluded to. That they're afraid of the overall power, being able to maintain a full race. Luckily, time is on their side because they have a few more years for development. But I agree, it's going to be quite a significant challenge to get to where they want to be in terms of the overall specs of the car.
Yeah, because I just think my mom drives a RAV4 hybrid, and that's a big boy just to fit the battery. Like, that's
It's
chaos.
huge.
And my dad has a Tucson plug-in hybrid. Not a huge SUV, but that battery takes up a lot of it. And to think about, and again, just we've even talked about the budgets some of these teams have and how far ahead they look at development in the current hybrid era. If you're looking at these specs and you've got 2030 in mind, if I'm a team like Haas that doesn't have a lot of money, or a lesser funded team like Williams, even who kind of has like bootstrapped a lot over the years, I'm quaking in my boots right now because I'm even thinking 6 years down the road, like, holy crap, how do I do this? How are we going to get from here to where we are when we don't have the budget of a Ferrari, Ferrari, a Mercedes, or a Red Bull?
Yeah,
Like,
and I think Haas has taken a good step in that direction in terms of signing on Alfa Romeo, so that
yeah.
they kind of have that cash behind them to help with those spec changes. But you almost kind of wonder, when does Williams still become a private, like still be a private team in the next decade, or do they bring in a car manufacturer to help support their operations? Like, I understand the idea of wanting to be private. Problem is that is not competitive
No.
anymore. That's the that's really, it really sucks to say that, but it's kind of the reality of F1.
Yeah, you even think about how competitive it is or difficult to make these kind of cars just for general consumers. Think about how much more difficult it is to make them for high performance vehicles like the F1 cars. It's nuts. So, very curious to see. I mean, obviously, if they're looking toward net zero in 2030, there's probably a lot of learnings from anyone who's associated with Formula E. But again, a private team like Williams, would they even consider something like that? Because they've always been like we do it ourselves and we figure it out. We don't rely on anyone else to do it, really. So it'll be, I'm curious to see what 2026 brings, because I think that will give us really good insight into what 2030 is going to look like as well.
I agree. I totally agree. We have some good news. Some interesting news on the Williams side. One, they're introducing their new Gulf livery for Singapore, Japan, and Qatar GP. It looks electric. My opinion, go to that old kind of baby blue or cloud blue livery with the orange features on it, kind of like the old Gulf logo. Similarly, you'd have seen that on McLaren's livery for Monaco a couple years ago. It's going to be a lot of fun, but also we were talking about this man, this young driver earlier, Alex Albon. James Vowles says that he is of world champion caliber given the right car. And based on the way that he's been able to drive the Williams this year, I have to agree.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a much more mature driver than he was in the Red Bull a couple of years ago. I think kind of stepping away from the Red Bull team was I think a better choice for Albon. Now, considering that, I feel that Red Bull obviously just makes their car spec to be either it's Verstappen's kind of car, or Adrian Newey just makes a car and Verstappen's just able to hone it in a more competitive setting. But if Williams is able to turn this around and become a competitive constructor, I can see Alex Albon winning races for sure. And I would love to see him win a World Drivers' Championship.
Absolutely. So, two thoughts. One, I just looked up the livery with the Golf. Oh my gosh, that's a good looking car. Like it even more than the McLaren at Monaco a few years ago. This is dope. Second, I have to agree with you. So, as much as I don't love the analogy I'm about to make, because I think it's definitely undervaluing Albon's skill as a driver, even when he was young, I think about high school and the number of times, like I come from a town where there are some very affluent pockets, and there would be the odd kid who, when they got their license, got to drive daddy's sports car. And then you hear stories about what happens to daddy's sports car afterward. And you kind of wonder sometimes with a younger driver, especially someone like Albon, who like wasn't expected to take that seat right when he did and didn't necessarily get to like have an off season to train and get ready. It was just like midway through the year, plunk, you go from what you're doing before to now driving this insane piece of machinery. Are you really surprised when things don't turn out the way you hope? If you put a 16-year-old in a Porsche 911, I'm sorry, but things are probably not going to go well. So, like you said, that time, that maturity he's had, as we saw in DTS, lots of even outside of the car introspective work and like work he did on his psychology and mentality and everything, which I think has helped majorly. He's so impressive. And I mean, he P6 in qualifying, P7 in the race in that Williams at the Temple of Speed.
Yeah.
Truly just
Oh, it's incredible, right? And I
yeah.
did go off your point too, in the sense that when he came into the sport in 2019, he was kind of like he was like Toro Rosso's new, part of the new junior driver program, kind of like their number two at that point, and just timing right in the sense that Gasly was not performing at Red Bull. I don't think he was getting along in the paddock with like Adrian Newey and some of the higher ups, right? Which then Marco said, okay, we're going to make a change, right? Because we don't want that in the paddock, right? You're going to go back to Toro Rosso, kind of effectively ended his time at Red Bull. And they weren't going to bring back Danny Kvyat because it didn't work beforehand. So who's the next guy you're going to bring in, right? That's Alex Albon, right? So it was quite an acceleration for his timing, which I think kind of, again, using a sports analogy here, when you get a first round pick that's really
Yep.
young and you just introduce him into like the professional team right away without any development or growth, it's either make or break. And sometimes the break can really show us the downfall. That kind of happened with Albon, but it's great to see him now that you mentioned the sports psychology, the maturity aspect. He's just he's a much more mature driver, but also more calm and presence in the
Mm-hmm.
car. And I think that's going to really bode well for his future success.
Yeah, I'm just glad he's got this shot at it again because in so many instances you are that 18, 19-year-old who's plunked on one of these teams, you underperform for half a season, a full season, you don't get that kind of shot again. You're done in the sport. So it's so nice. Not only that he got that opportunity, but that he was ready for it and has capitalized on it. So little round of applause. You're not hearing me clapping, but I am clapping my hands for Alvin.
This guy's going on towards that all the idea of team and teammates. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen had some firework comments this weekend in the social media. Lewis alluding to Max saying that he's not had the same caliber of teammates as he has during his time at Red Bull. Max preemptively saying, he had a pretty mature response, I thought, in terms of he was essentially like, okay, fair enough, but why are you talking? I think he's just more so jealous of the car that Max has right now, and they had their time to celebrate. Now it's our time to go forward with, but you know Jenson Button got asked this question, and I thought he made some really important points that I think I'm going to echo, in the sense that yes, I don't think Max has had the championship caliber teammates that Lewis has had, especially with Nico Rosberg, Fernando Alonso, right? Like those are world drivers champions that have been Lewis's teammates. However, uh, as um, as Jenson Button alluded to, and I agree with him, I wouldn't want to face Max in the current card that he's got. Max will kick your ass. He's so
Yeah.
good in that car. And whether it be that it's made tailored to him, or he's just able to take Adrian Newey's concept, soak it in, and just bring out every ounce of performance in that car. I don't I would it would be interesting to see what Max and Lewis would be like as teammates, because I think both be valid points, but I wouldn't want to face Max in the current machinery that he's got.
No, and you can see that even with his own teammate. Like, I don't necessarily know that Checo is world driving championship material, but he's a fantastic driver. I mean, look at the number of P2 finishes he's got this year, P3 finishes, and he's got two firsts. Like, he's clearly got a good grip of this machine himself. But yeah, like I don't think it really matters. Like if you think about it, Lewis won a whole bunch of championships with Valtteri Bottas, who's also a very skilled driver, And to be like, oh yeah, well, let's leave it up to the teammates or whatever. Like, no, Lewis, you're an awesome driver yourself and you were in a fantastic piece of machinery. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter who the number two driver is. A lot of that is you being able to pull out something special in that machine to win by the margins that you're winning by. And that's it too. It's not just that Max is winning. It's that Max is winning by like 40 seconds every race.
Yeah.
I don't really care who your second driver is. I don't really care about any of that. That is a testament to him. Because even if he were able to do something good in this car, like you would, we never saw these kinds of, like, I don't know. It's just insane to say that it in part comes down to the number two. Like, what?
And the issue is that it would never happen where both of them are teammates.
No.
Like it would be
Lewis is never going to go to Red Bull.
and
I don't
Max
think
would
Red Bull would want
never
to
go to
have
Mercedes,
him.
right?
No.
They've been butting heads since day one. Like, and the only way to settle this debate would for them to be teammates, giving them the exact same spec car, and going from there on out. And yeah, it's just to me, it's an odd comment. Why? I don't understand what the whole point of like Lewis saying that. What was the purpose of kind of like generating that news? Are you trying? For me, that's more of a shot at Checo than anything currently right now. And I don't know if there's any bad blood there, because it just, to me, that comment just kind of somewhat came out of left field. And it's, to me, it's implied that Checo is nowhere near the caliber level that Max is, which is fair to say, but that is kind of a backhand comment in my opinion.
And he's also still such a skilled driver. Like, even though we've talked about this time and again, and like even Helmut Marko has talked about it, I know he doesn't do great in qualifying, but there's still no denying he's a talented driver in a fantastic car when he can make up for it on race day. Like, and I also just don't, like you said, I don't understand why it was said, because it would be one thing if Max had the better second seat drivers to be like, well, that's why he won the last few championships. He's got the better second seat driver. This comment makes, no matter what way I try to frame the context, it makes no sense, because it doesn't devalue Max's performance and championship winning abilities by saying this. Because if anything, you're giving him a compliment by saying your second drivers weren't as good as mine, and yet you still won. Kudos, bro. Like, what? I don't.
And also, like, is he trying to like force Red Bull then to give quote unquote an even car to both drivers? I'm like, the result's still going to be the same thing.
Like, I don't understand it. I
Never
really don't
will.
get it. I don't understand why. I don't know if maybe he was feeling salty, because I think there was a comment earlier in the weekend where Max alluded to Lewis's 6 championship wins, and the commentator had to correct him and say, "Oh, Lewis has actually won 7 championships." And he was like, "Oh, really? Has he? I could swear it's 6. I think you're wrong." So I don't know if maybe Lewis is feeling a little spicy after that one or what, but that was, I don't know. Just I don't get it. I don't get it.
No, fair enough. And the only way for them to settle this debate, be on the same team.
Yep.
We'll go into the final part of the weekend. So this was interesting news. Now, there's obviously rumors, but I think Helmut Marko was talking about how, now with Ricciardo being injured and Lawson coming into the fray, you now have 5 drivers for 4 spots effectively. And this all of a sudden has now come to a point where potentially Yuki Tsunoda's seat is at jeopardy at AlphaTauri.
Which, if you're Yuki,
I know, poor Yuki.
If you're Yuki, you're like, whoa, when was I put on the chopping block? What is this?
And that's what I'm saying. I'm like, this guy just caught a straight bullet out of nowhere, because they want to keep, I think they want to keep Ricciardo on for that veteran case for development, right? But it's kind of come to a point now where it's like, if they're going to keep Checo as part of probably a great number 2 driver to Max, and they want Ricciardo to be there as more of a veteran capacity and help develop for development. Yeah, it's between Yuki and Lawson, and like they're both so young. And to tell me that Yuki, who's driven fantastically, I think this season overall, considering it now is on the hot seat, it's just kind of mind-boggling.
It makes me laugh, really. And then, like, If anything, I would expect it to be Ricardo because he was just brought back for the second half of the season, only got to race a little bit and that like for 2 races and then had to withdraw with the injury. So if anything, you're like, oh, this guy's still untested in the car. That's likely who we would want to replace. So you're like, what, por, por qué? Por qué? I
Well,
don't know.
it's a very small sample size, being 2 races, obviously, but who would you rather have in the car right now? Would you rather have Lawson or would you rather have Ricardo being that number 2 seat, right?
Yeah, like if I were to think anyone was up for debate, that's what I again, of course, fan favorites, everyone's super jazzed that he's back and all that stuff, but like you would just assume that would be the one that everyone is more is questioning more than Yuki. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe just because we haven't had silly season yet, probably
yeah.
just wanting to stir the pot a little bit, create some silly season news, which I completely appreciate.
Yeah, because we didn't get our mid-season silly season like we did last year, so we're kind of all just dying for a little bit of drama and insanity here.
And there's a lot of teams that need to confirm seats, right? Like I don't know if Joe's seat's going to be is secure at Alfa Romeo. We don't know if Sargent's seat's going to be secure next year at Williams, based on the direction they're going. But we should find out fairly soon, as next week we are in Singapore for the Singapore Airlines Singapore Grand Prix. It is a wonderful night race, I find, and there is an update to the track. They have reduced, I believe, the last kind of in sector 3, where they do the kind of chicane turn to go down towards the bay and then come back up. That is now a straight line across.
Interesting.
I think just got to help get some more for racing feel in that regards. But Erica, we will most likely either do a preview of Singapore Grand Prix or a review for sure. But what are your overall initial thoughts going into the Singapore Grand Prix next week?
Yeah, I'm excited to see what changes to the racing we see with these adjustments to the track. I think it should give us a bit more excitement because hopefully there'll be some more speed coming into some other things with more of like a straight than a bunch of little turns and stuff. But I'm curious to see kind of what to expect from some of these other cars. Will Liam Lawson continue to inspire and finally get a points finish in his third race? Because I'm assuming Ricardo is still out a little while longer. And I'm also excited to see if maybe we'll have some more Ferrari excitement going on with this kind of track layout. Will we have Sainz and Leclerc giving us a good show in qualifying and hopefully some excitement at the front of the pack for this race? I don't know.
And I also want to mention that to me, I'm very interested to see if Max is actually going to win this weekend. He's never won in Singapore, I don't believe.
Really?
Well, maybe I'm trying to think. I don't think he's won in Singapore. Yeah, 8th, 6th, retirement, 2nd, 3rd. Didn't race there in 2020 or 2021, and he finished P7 last year. So he has not won an F1 race in Singapore. Checo won it last year. So does Max keep his streak? Does Red Bull keep their streak overall?
I'm also curious because as much as Max did not succumb to the Monza curse this time around, is there a chance that perhaps something will happen now that we have completed the race there this year? I know they say that the Monza curse is at the same track next year, but you never know what's going to happen with the kind of voodoo and stuff that goes on in F1. So should be interesting. And you just know that there's some Tifosi fan out there with a little voodoo doll of Max Verstappen who's just waiting for something to go wrong. So
very fair. Well, Erica, thank you so much for joining this week. That was season 3, episode 24 of the F1 podcast. Erica, if you'd like to do the honors of sending us out of the closing remarks, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening to yet another episode of the F1 podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube for Ricci or the F1.podcast. If you want to keep up with all the goings on, make sure to follow us on Instagram at F1.podcast. We post a lot of content there, letting you know when new episodes are released, as well as just some of the other antics that we get up to. Enjoy the rest of your week. We will see you in Singapore, and let's get on with the rest of the 2023 season.